T.S. Eliot and His Poetry by student number 341628085. The Many Opinions of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot was a pioneer of modern poetry and helped to push forward new themes such as the unreliability of memory, a disconnection from nature, man's loss of purpose, and the fear of death, as well as moving towards new techniques in his poetry such as fragmentation, heavy sensory imagery like the use of unique rhyme patterns and rhythms, and the economic use of language. Eliot's influence to the poetic world is a direct result of his modernist style and revolutionary concepts. Due to the complexities of Eliot's poems and themes featured in them, which happen to intertwine with phenomena throughout history, Eliot's poetry is still relevant in today's society and therefore are still receiving praise from many critics. Fragmentation. The use of fragmentation is used to explore man's state of being in the modern world. Fragmentation is used in Eliot's poetry to explore man's strained mental state in the New World as it changed from a more agricultural-based society to an urban one, as well as portraying alienation and urban decay. In his poem Rhapsody on a Windy Night, fragmentation is used to separate the times to show how fragmented his reality really is, and showing that although time is moving linearly, it is not moving at a consistent rate. In this poem, we are shown fragments of the city he is strolling through, which are depicted as lonely and disconnected from nature. The main character is used as an object to guide the poem along, rather than an actual person with a life and a story of his own, which could represent man's loss of purpose in the shift from the agricultural-based society to a more urban one. In his poem, The Hollow Man, the poem is split into 5 separate parts to show different key themes in each while maintaining an overall theme of isolation, despite being physically surrounded by other people. We as the audience are also shown small snippets of a war zone. These are depicted in the language Eliot uses, for example, leaning together headpiece filled with straw. The show shows the soldiers huddling together for protection, taking orders and not making their own decisions, hence the headpiece filled with straw. There is also enjambment here which forces the reader to continue the sentence, which could symbolize the constant exhaustion and non-stop action of war. In Eliot's other poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the use of fragmentation appears more throughout the thoughts of J. Alfred Prufrock, especially in the line, "The women come and go, talking of Michelangelo," which is repeated several times in the poem. This sentence could be seen as something that uses these women to represent the society's values at the time and insinuate that the world only cared about something if it was perfect with no flaws, which could also help show how he sees himself in opposition to societal values. All of these examples show how T.S. Eliot refused to paint the world as perfect, unlike the Romantic era. The aim to depict real life in the new urban life with all the imperfections and flaws of the human experience. He was provocative in his writing by creating an unnatural scene by forcing his poetry into the modern world. Heavy imagery. Heavy sensory imagery combined with irregular rhyme patterns and rhythms is often used in T.S. Eliot's poetry to create a push and pull between engaging the reader but also making them uncomfortable. In Rhapsody on a Windy Night, it is used to create a mystical atmosphere and a sense of supernatural. In the quote, "Whispering lunar incantations dissolves the flow of memory and all its clear relations, its divisions and precisions." These sentences paint a picture of unclear memories, influenced like magic from the moon. Memory is now seen as unreliable and twisted by the moon and its power. This creates a sense of discomfort in the reader and makes it unclear if this scene is depicting a dream or a nightmare. In The Hollow Man, they are physically empty but filled with emotion, or vice versa. So although they may be stuffed with straw as suggested in the later line, they have become emotionally numb. This traumatic event and the feel of heaviness of the things that they have experienced with them, yet contradictory to their trauma, cannot feel anything at all. In The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, Eliot shows the self-loathing and uncertainness of J. Alfred Prufrock through his thoughts and how they are being told to us. The poem is told to us entirely in a monologue due to the iambic tetrameter used in this poem. Although his thoughts appear disjointed, they are connected. The theme of fear. Fear is a very prominent theme in T.S. Eliot's poetry because it was very apparent at that time due to World War I and other crises. Because of all the chaos he was surrounded by, there was a lot of uncertainty. The hollow men, fear of being forgotten along with the fear of meeting death. With direct eyes to death's other kingdom, remember us, if at all, not as lost violent souls. The hollow men in this poem are dying, or they fear that they are getting close to death. They fear of what is on the other side of life and to meet death, to look at death in their direct eyes. They are also afraid not only of being forgotten, but how they will be remembered. When speaking about the imagery, I suggested that these hollow men are perhaps soldiers from World War I. The line, remember us, if at all not as lost violent souls, suggests that they do want to be remembered after death, but not for what they have done. Rhapsody on a Windy Night. The sense of fear in this poem is a fear of a lack of progress. Almost each stanza of this poem starts by telling the time, although that this tells us that time in the poem is indeed passing by, not much else is happening within the poem. This creates a lack of a sense of progress. The fear that comes from this is that time is constantly moving, but we are not using it productively. It raises the question of what we are wasting our time and not really living our lives. Because as time moves on, we edge closer to death, so we have a limited amount of time to spend on our lives. But what if we are not using it the way we should? The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Using a similar example to the one I previously used when speaking about the use of imagery, the fear that is felt in this poem is the fear that comes with insecurities, the fear of what people are thinking about you. With a bald spot in the middle of my hair, they will say, how your hair is growing thin. The use of brackets shows that this is only what Prufrock believes people are saying about him behind his back. He has no proof that this is what people are saying about him, but this is what he believes they are discussing, rather than discussing, as that is what he thinks of himself. His insecurities of himself he creates, this irrational fear of overthinking what other people are judging him for. When all is said and done, T.S. Eliot was very influential in his time. He was a magnificent storyteller, whether it be in his plays or his poetry. The risk he took in exploring complicated themes, developing his own style, and the use of new techniques in his poetry to set a distinct difference between his poetry and those who had come before played out well for Eliot. Due to all the reasons I have stated, Eliot was, and will continue to be a very relevant, powerful poet and an inspiration. Eliot was more than just the sum of his parts. He was not the god that people painted him to be, but he also was not just the bad values that he often had and the very strict religion that he held him and others to. In these ways, I believe that Eliot deserves the title of the American poet who helped shape modernism and lead the way for the revolution of poetry.